Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Coding 101 is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This episode of Coding 101 is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Simple and fast cloud hosting built for developers. Deploy an SSD cloud server in 55 seconds. Try it today for free. Visit DigitalOcean.com, and once you sign up, be sure to enter the promo code C101 in the billing section for a $10 credit. And by Lynda.com, the online learning platform with over 3,000 on-demand video courses to help you strengthen your business, technology, and creative skills. For a free 10-day trial, visit lynda.com/C101. That's LYNDA.com/C101. On this episode of Coding 101, we're bringing in 4 kitchens to tell you about the TWiT API. Hello and welcome to Coding 101. It's a TWiT show where we let you into the wonderful world of the Code Warrior / Code Monkey. I'm Father Robert Baldassare, and joining me today is Mr. Patrick Delahanty. Patrick, you are our guru here of all in-house web things.
Yes, good to be back.
And you're also the man responsible for approving our keys whenever people want to play with the TWiT API.
Yeah, I go through them every day, and anybody that's got an approved email address, they get a key.
Now, folks, we should probably point out something at the beginning of the episode. We waited a while last time. That is, the keys that you see in the show, they won't work. By the time you watch the episode, we've already deleted them. We just created them specifically for this episode. But, and we'll repeat this at the end, if you want your own key, if you like what we're doing, if you want to play with the TWiT API, what do they do, Patrick?
Just go to the TWiT website, go under About, and then go down to the Developer API. You can find information on the documentation for the API. Follow the link on that page to Apiary. And there's also a link to 3Scale where you can sign up for the API.
Right. Well, folks, of course, it's not just Patrick and I. I've got to include the man who I think really does make Coding 101. He is my co-host. He is a lead software developer at Microsoft. He deals with CRM. Mr. Lou Maresca. Lou Maresca, thank you very much for coming back on to Coding 101.
Hey guys, great to be back.
Now, we've got a mini heat wave going on down here in California. What you got up in Redmond?
Oh, it's beautiful today, and I actually work from home, so it feels really good.
Well, just rub that in there. That's fine. Now, go ahead, keep talking about it. It makes me feel much better. Now, Lou, you actually had an interesting choice for the conversation at the top of the show. Specifically, you wanted to talk about the proliferation of virtual assistants. Now, for the people playing at home, what is a virtual assistant?
There's a great quote that actually somebody wrote, and it says, Jarvis, you know, Tony Stark's Iron Man Jarvis. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie. He basically was Tony Stark's digital assistant, right? And he basically helped Tony Stark do whatever he needed to do when it came to, hey, go do this, go do that. You know, give me the weather, give me the time. You know, set up a task, get a calendar right, remind me of a birthday. These types of things are all kind of growing on people, and that's where digital assistants are coming from. And the quote that I really love is, Jarvis wouldn't be much good to Tony Stark if he didn't give him access to everything in his list, from calendars, contacts, to everything data that he had, right? So I think that's kind of the theme that you have when it comes to digital assistants.
And actually, that's really, really important. That's why we're talking about it, because it is a big developer question. If you give one program access to everything, and you really do have to give it access to everything, otherwise it wouldn't be a good assistant, what do you as a developer have to consider? Now, Patrick, this is one of those conundrums that we talk about as programmers all the time, which is, I want to be able to build off of as much information as possible, but what is safe for me as a developer to let out in the wild?
Yeah, and I know as a user, I'm always hesitant when I see something wants access to my contact list. It may only need to look up the names of my friends or an email address, but I'm giving it access to everything. And as a developer, I have to reassure the user what I'm going to do with that. And I like the applications that will actually tell me what I'm doing or what they're going to do with this information before they ask for access to that.
Right. Of course, we know that there are some big, very popular digital assistants that some people absolutely love. There's Siri for Apple. We've got Cortana on the Microsoft side, and Google now is sort of a personal assistant, which actually has access to a lot more information than the other two assistants. Lou, Take us through what each of those actually have, what information they use in order to give you that personal assistant.
Yeah, so like for instance, Cortana is explicitly on, especially on your Windows device, it'll ask you for access to specific things. One, it'll be calendar events, your calls, your messages, your email, different accounts, what accounts you have with, whether it's Live or Microsoft or Facebook, that kind of thing. Your browsing history, and then it gives you, once it gives you access, it's actually what they call deep learning, where you actually provide them with additional data. So like, for instance, Cortana will ask when you say, hey, make sure that you remind me about a birthday that's a week from now, to call Susan for her birthday or that kind of thing. It will actually put a reminder in there, and then it'll remember that from then on, right? So then the next year, it'll say, hey, you remember when you asked me about to set a birthday reminder? Well, the birthday's coming up again. So it reuses that information. It'll also be able to, sooner or later, be able to tell you where to shop and what to do and that kind of thing. So it's also a learning engine too. So that's really where Cortana comes in. And the nice thing about it is it seamlessly integrates. So that means now if you have Windows 10, you have Cortana, and if you start using it there regularly, then now, I don't know if you guys heard, but now there's a beta on Android that had just came out. So now you can not only use it on Windows Phone, which is deeply integrated, but it's also over here on Android, which now it lets you, if you start using it on Android, and a lot of people use Google now on Android, but if you start using Cortana, now the data that you provided on your desktop also flows over to your phone. So that same reminder, that same task, the same deep learning that it's doing on your desktop also flows over to your Android phone. So it's like basically much more valuable, I think, from just having it on your mobile device itself.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because if I have a digital assistant that's built into my OS, so iOS with Siri or Windows Phone with Cortana, I can sort of make sure that all of my security is handled in the background. I can build that into the operating system. What intrigues me is Cortana on top of Android, because now it's just an app. It's not part of the operating system. It wasn't built in by the manufacturers. It's something that has to come on the top. Can you make an app like Cortana that will work like Cortana on the Windows platform without being part of the OS?
So yeah, that's a good question. So so Cortana itself it's built very explicitly to use multiple different channels to be able to supply you with a good amount of processing power behind the scenes. But what Google now has the ability to do is it's built directly into, like, let's say Android, and it gives you that ability to interact with every app that you have. It gives you the ability to kind of have deep access to your camera and to your actually microphone. So like, for instance, you could say, okay, Google, and then it summons it to come up. With Cortana, that functionality is only available on the Windows Phone because it's part of the operating system. So deep down underneath, you can say, hey, Cortana, and then it wakes up. But again, with the Cortana on the Android phone, you don't get that capability because it's not as deep down. So you're kind of limited to what you can do from that sense. But with Android, it's quite an open platform. So there are some tricks that you can do when it comes to that kind of thing.
All right. Patrick, I want to throw this over to you a little bit. So I tried playing around with an application that would collect information that I could use to make interesting choices for people as far as what they might want to visit. And it looked at email. It looked at what their surfing utilities might report back that they were looking at, and it looked at calendar to see what trips might fit in. It never really worked properly because people would always disallow one or another. Right. How would you design something like that? I mean, how would you try to be able? How would you convince your audience, your intended audience, that no, I'm really going to use your information for good things. Let this go through.
Well, I think if you explain to them and say, I need this information. Here's why I need it. And I've seen some apps that do this, where they will say, I need X, Y, and Z, and without these, I can't do that. And you have to just reassure them that you're going to keep it safe, put up a privacy policy or whatever it takes. But if you're just having the pop-up that says, this app needs access to your contacts, and not explaining why.
Which is what I see. That's all I see.
You haven't seen the apps that actually explain it first, and then the pop-up comes? Because that actually reassures me. I love it when developers do that, and they tell me why they need access. I mean, if you're using a photo app and it needs access to your camera, it's pretty obvious why. But you know, if something needs access to your location and you're not really sure, wait, why does this?
So wait,
Photo app to your contacts? Like, what do you need that for?
yeah,
right?
I've got that every once in a while. I install an app on my Android phone, and it says, we need access to your telephone. I'm like, wait, you don't call and you don't need my contact, so what is this? Maybe that's now, for this generation of developers, that's now table stakes. You need to explain why you need each piece of personal information. Although that's really inconvenient. I mean, for some of these applications, that's a EULA that goes on for 30 pages.
Yeah, and I mean, if you don't have access to that, all you can do is display information saying, sorry, I can't do this until you enable that. Yeah. And I've also seen that done too, where...
Yeah, I mean, I could be slightly critical on Windows 10 here, because when you're installing Windows 10 for the first time, it asks you and it says, hey, do you want to provide data to Microsoft or help them, blah, blah, blah. They don't really give you, like Patrick said, some really good description as what are they going to do with that, right? What do they need that for? So, you know, in the same sense, you know, they should learn from other companies like these smaller app companies that say, hey, we're going to need it because in order to take a picture, we need access to your camera. And in order to tell, you know, to know where that photo came from, we need access to your GPS. If you don't want those features, then you can't really install this application, that kind of thing. You know, so they need to really explain it better, I think.
Yeah. And on the developer side, if you are going to be creating apps, I think you need to be ready to disable very easily certain parts of your application, should they choose not to allow that sharing of information. Right. So after you tell them, if they still want to turn off the GPS, your app still needs to work without tagging pictures. Now, Lou, there is one more assistant that's coming out, and it may actually be along the vein of what we're talking about. It's a newer effort by Facebook.
That's right. Yeah, so Facebook just launched what they call the M, which is interesting. It's their very own digital assistant. And the unique thing about this one is it's kind of a combination of artificial intelligence backed by real people. So the idea here is when you ask it a question... So it's no longer a
digital assistant. There's an actual assistant there.
That's right. Yeah, so exactly.
Wait a minute. We seem to be going backwards.
Is this like that Amazon thing? Where
is there a guy in a box just looking?
Well, it's like the Amazon thing, right?
Right.
Where
There's a hamster in the wheel, right? And he's running.
All right. So wait, what is this?
So yeah, so the idea here is they had purchased a startup or a company that actually does this, what they call deep learning, and the concept behind deep learning is you don't go somewhere to get data for somebody. You actually, the data is provided by them, by the person themselves. And so over time, they start to pull, so the idea here is this is built into the Messenger app, but it won't actually get data from your feeds or from anything else. It'll get data from the messages that you send and your behaviors that you do. And so the idea here is they use that information then to make it more useful to you later on. So up front, in order to make it more useful, they use this backing of real people. And the idea is there's a team that sits there. And so if you say, hey, give me a restaurant that's close to here, or give me a customer service person over here, it will actually use a combination of artificial intelligence and a combination of real people, so deciding on whether it's good or not. But the real unique thing here is that most of these assistants, like the Bing app, the Google Now, the Cortana app, Siri, they all do stuff for you, and they ask you, and they will do just small things like tasks and send emails and stuff. But what they don't do is actually take action on things. And the thing's different for Facebook is it will actually physically take an action. Like, say, I will need a restaurant reservation for Italian at 3 p.m. and it will go and make it for you and then ask you if it's okay. So that's kind of the unique derivative behind it, and that's where kind of the human factor comes into it.
Right, and that's a very interesting concept of having a virtual assistant that doesn't have as long of a memory as, say, Cortana or Siri. It's not really poking back into the history of your data. It's just looking at what you're providing it at the moment. Could be an interesting trend. Now, I like the fact that we're talking about this because I'm trying to get on the show for a future Android app module someone who actually will guide us through the programming of a basic virtual assistant. So if we can get that, it'll tie this all up in a neat bow. One last bit before we leave this topic, Lou. Have you tried Cortana on Android yet?
I have. It's actually fantastic. It's not as deeply ingrained as Google Now, but like the differences between the two are very, very minute. I mean, the difference you can basically see the difference in, like, for instance, they'll give you different weather potentially. It won't give you as deep information around the news. But again, if you're using Cortana on your Windows PC as well as on your phone, on the Android phone, you get sometimes deeper information about what you need or what you want. So I think that's where the key is there. Google now will be a little faster and it's easier to activate because you can say, hey, okay, Google. But the other things, otherwise it does the same. It's pretty good.
I will say this. People are going to be worried about exposing their information to a digital personal assistant. However, a digital personal assistant has never written a book about you after they've left your employ. When we come back, we're going to be speaking with David Diers from 4 Kitchens. If you want to know how the TWiT website, the new look came about, and how the API was created, you're going to want to stay tabbed. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the first sponsor of this episode of Coding 101. Let me ask you a little something. When you start developing, how do you get that development, that app, that service out to the world? Well, in the old days, and Patrick, maybe you can back me up on this, you used to have to stand up some iron. You had to get yourself a connection and make sure that it was secure and make sure that everything was patched properly, and then install your service on it so that you could actually stress it a little bit with some real world traffic.
Yeah, and don't forget, hire a server admin.
Oh yeah, hire a server admin. And by the way, if the thing ever falls down, you're going to have to hire remote hands to go over there. Either that or get up in the middle of the night and go fix it yourself. Yeah. It was fun, right? I mean, I love those days.
Oh yeah, great days.
Yeah. Well, those were great days if the internet wasn't part of your business, wasn't part of your livelihood. But of course, today it is. And if you need to be up right away, if you need to be up all the time, and if you need to be up as quickly as possible, that's what you want to use, DigitalOcean. Now, DigitalOcean is built around the concept of droplets. These are containerized applications that allow you to take your service, your app, your whatever, and run it on top of DigitalOcean servers. Now, DigitalOcean is built for developers and is used by over 400,000 of them, including TWiT TV. You can deploy and configure your droplets via a streamlined control panel or simple API. You get to choose your OS: Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, CoreOS, and FreeBSD. They have a one-click install that lets you quickly deploy apps like Django, Docker, Drupal, LAMP, GitLab, MediaWiki, Node.js, WordPress, Ghost, OwnCloud, Ruby on Rails, and more. And all of their servers are built on hex-core machines with dedicated ECC memory and RAID SSD storage. Servers can have up to 20 CPUs, 64 gigabytes of memory, and 640 gigabytes of SSD space. It's highly scalable to meet the demands of a rapidly growing application or business, so you can start simple and grow as your demands grow with your business. And they also give you auto backups and snapshots so that you don't have to worry about that backup process. That's just part of the package. You can deploy servers in regions all around the world, so you can geolocate to make sure that you're as close to your audience as possible with gigabit speeds and 99.99% uptime. They also give you full-featured DNS management to easily manage your domains and, if you need them, dedicated IPs. They'll give you web console access with HTML5 plus SSH, SFTP, and KVM VNC for virtual desktops. And it's so easy to get started that you can deploy an SSD cloud server in as little as 55 seconds. Well, are you out of reasons? You really should be. But if you're not, I'll give you one more reason why you should go over to DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean has incredibly affordable and straightforward pricing, with servers starting at just $5 per month. There's also hourly pricing available, starting at less than a penny per hour. Imagine that, a penny per hour to get your service up and running on a real internet-facing service. But we're going to make it easier. If you go to DigitalOcean.com right now and create an account, you can get and deploy your SSD cloud server for free. Once you confirm your email and account, you can go to the billing section and enter the promo code C101 for a free $10 credit. That's plenty to get started and explore what DigitalOcean can do for you. That's DigitalOcean.com, DigitalOcean.com. And once you sign up, enter the code C101 in the billing section for a $10 credit. And we thank DigitalOcean for their support of Coding 101. Up next, I'm actually very excited to have this guest on the show, is Mr. David Diers from 4 Kitchen. David, thank you very much for coming on to Coding 101.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, you were the guru, the part of the 4 Kitchens team that really drove the look, the feel, and the back end of the new TWiT TV website.
You're actually giving me way too much credit. There was a whole team of 4 Kitchens web chefs is what we would go by, but I was responsible for the Drupal end because TWiT is basically what we're calling in Drupal, and this is not unusual to a lot of other development platforms who've been going in microservices directions. But in Drupal, we call this sort of approach headless, because Drupal, you'll remember back to TWiT's own Drupal 6, website. It's a CMS platform, and Drupal is a special kind of CMS platform where it's like a toolbox more than it is, a blogging platform like WordPress, say. I know you can do a lot more with WordPress now than you could before, but it's sort of had its origins in blogging and Drupal as well, but they really worked on sort of the framework part of that. So there's a lot of community support and community contributions around it, kind of plugins and pluggable additions to the Drupal's functionality. So the difference with the way you guys went on this, and where many other people are actually now choosing to do, is to kind of have a back end which is driven by Drupal, and then have a separate front end. So my responsibilities for this, a long way to go about this, is to say that I was responsible for the Drupal side on the front end, and the presentation side. We had an engineer by the name of Matt Grill, who's my cohort. We worked hand in hand to get the TWiT website out, and then we had a talented designer here at 4 Kitchens as well, Jared Rogers, and Karis Hurd did some IA on the front start. So there was a whole team of folks, and Susie Bates obviously was project managing throughout that process. So we had a really good team on that. So yeah, and Peter Sieg also assisted. I have to name like everybody. It's like the Emmys or something.
Yeah, they may be part of the team, but none of them are musicians. So I'm sorry.
That is true.
They don't get to be part of this discussion. Actually, we've got Noob Coder in our chat room right now who's saying, Drupal's PHP, right? No, I'll pass. And, it's interesting because I hear that a lot. We actually just covered a banter in last week's episode in which GitHub released stats on the most popular languages for projects that were submitted to the repository, and PHP has been dead level. It's been like number 4 forever. It's not changing. So it's one of these languages it's not so sexy anymore. It really isn't. I mean, it was in the early days of Drupal and WordPress. But nowadays, it's just, it's there. It's in the background, but it doesn't get a lot of press. David, let me ask you about this. We were wondering about the process of turning something like the old TWiT Drupal page, which, let's be honest, wasn't great. It was good for what it did. At the time, for the resources that we had, that's what we developed. What do you have to do to take something that people know and then turn it into something that people will like but still recognize? I figured that's one of the biggest challenges of developers who need to take an existing content platform, any sort of CMS, and turn it into something new.
Yeah, some of that is the front end, some of that is the experience of the website. The user experience, the UX of the website has a big part to play. That's on the presentation layer. Other parts of it have to do with how the information is organized, or what the functionality is of the site, sort of interacting with the players. And for y'all, what's it like to discover episodes? What's it like to drill down into information? You have pretty interesting from your stats, from your Google Analytics stats. You've got pretty interesting use. People kind of explode around live events. Traffic blows up, and people are looking at things. There are long tail folks who are interested in digging through like every single episode of Security Now ever, and so so there's like various uses, but they're quite different patterns, right? And so some of it's around like organizing the information differently, thinking about modern presentation. That was definitely one of the things that sort of Leo and Lisa came to us with, is like we need a responsive site, because the old site maybe had some problems. Working on phones and other devices, tablets, and so on and so forth, and started being device agnostic. So we tried to answer that with the design. Again, that's sort of out of my wheelhouse, but certainly was involved or part of those conversations, as they have like implications on what I need to do and the kind of information I need to model and provide.
Right. This is something that has intrigued me since we got the new website, and that is there are developers out there who just say, well, I just want to code. You know people like that.
Yeah.
Patrick, you know that. Lou, do you know people who just kind of want to be left alone just to do their coding project?
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want nitpicking people, right? Right.
And you really can't do that. I mean, if you're going to be a developer who's part of a team, and everyone is now part of a team, you have to go through process. And I hate process, but it's absolutely necessary. What was the process like for creating TWiT TV? Before the first line of code was written to support the new site, what did you need? What information did you have to get so that you could program right the first day?
Yeah, well, we're an agile shop, but we do like to go through a process of discovery. Well, in any sort of client engagement, at TWiT or anybody else that we happen to work with, it's about establishing relationships and trying to uncover the needs that people have, and you have a lot of meetings. Talk through things, but for our agile process, we basically had time with Patrick was there for a lot of it. Leo was there like every day, basically talking to us about what he thought about what we were doing, and we present, where we were, if we had any blockers, if we had any moments of like, we need to get some information. Jeff Needles was there at the time, and Bruce later on. So, we'd always sort of get together for 10, 15 minutes each day and kind of like talk about that process. So even before I wrote a line of code, Karis Hurd over here, who is a UX expert, was meeting with Leo and Lisa and the rest of the TWiT team that was involved, and kind of talking about priorities, what was important to them. One of the great things that happened with y'all, which is like pretty rare, but it's because people who like TWiT, love TWiT, is that we did like a card sorting exercise with an online tool. And, typically it's like pulling teeth to get anybody to do this. You're lucky if you get like 15 people, but, I think it got announced on the air, and it actually, I think, disabled the third-party tool because the response was so high and they were actually quite good. They turned around and fixed it and got it back up again. But for a while there, the response, the participation level from everybody there who, is a fan of TWiT.tv is like coming in and filling out this card, start telling people how, answering questions like, where would you put this piece of content? If you were going to look for this, where would you go? If you were going to figure out what's Leo's birthday, where would you look for that, or something like, like these kinds of odd questions that help people like Karis and Jared kind of understand where the information needs to get sorted. And so, without that work, without basically that baseline of understanding of what the content is, what it should like basically we have the baseline of here's what it is, and then we have some desires and some understanding of where the direction of the site needs to go from stakeholders, Leo and Lisa and everybody else, right? And then sort of like data analysis about Google Analytics. What are people going to pages? What does the traffic use look like? What do we need to look out for? What kind of caching response do we need? What information is important? What information can just go away? Like no one's looking at it. It's not worth your time or effort to kind of get it up there. So those are all the kinds of things that we kind of have in the hopper as ammunition to like be able to start coding and make sure and sort of validate that the approach we're about to take is the right one.
All right, now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. I mean, it's nice to talk about that process, and I will just say better you than me, because I have very little patience for that process. I prefer to let the smart people handle that, and I'll take care of it when they're done deciding what they want. But one of the questions we had from this very module about the TWiT API is, how did the TWiT API come to be? How did you decide what calls they could make, what functions, what features you would include in the API? Because that's really what our audience is going to be taking away. If they want to use the TWiT API to display TWiT content, they're going to be going through what you acted as the gatekeeper for. Actually, let me bring in some of my co-hosts here. Patrick, when you were talking to David and the Four Kitchens team, what were the conversations you had about the TWiT API?
A lot of them, they were what fields, what data we stored, and what information we needed to access. And we do a lot of the processing for the encoding of the episodes in the back end. And so we had to explain how that process occurred, the different status that we'd have to send back to the website, and all the data that we store. And that kind of became the basis for handling that information.
All right. And Lou, when you do development, do you do the same sort of process that David's describing here? Do you sit down with the principals and say, okay, well, what do we need out of the next release, out of the next update? Or is it just left up to the individual teams?
Normally it's whatever like he was talking about. You talk about actors and use cases and in different scenarios. So you have to, normally I like to start pretty low, like Patrick was saying. How is the data stored, or how is it related to each other? What's the relationships that are set up? What kind of queries do you need to make? Do I need to make sure the show is related to the person and that kind of thing? And then from that, you kind of decide on how the query layer exists and up from there. So yeah, it's a process, and then you kind of move over to talking to people and what they actually need and feature wise.
Right. Okay, David, back to you, that question. How did the TWiT API come to be? How did you get those specific calls, those specific features into our package?
Yeah, well, there was a couple kind of like general approach guides that I think like, Matt and I sat in a room and tried to kind of hammer these things out. And that was after, Karis had done the work to sort of outline what the destination content, what people were looking for from the card sorts, and then, what Leo and Lisa and the rest of the TWiT team thought was, should come out in the site. So we had all that information, and taking all that information along with like, the voluminous number of fields that Patrick provided, we were able to kind of think about, well, how are these entities constructed in Drupal 6 right now? Are these are they doing what they need to do? Like basically, when I talk about entities in Drupal, in Drupal speak, they're called nodes in D6, and in Drupal 7 they became entities, and they're like fieldable objects, right? That have for shows, and you can see kind of. There are representations of them in the API, but it might have like the show title or the airing time or fields like that. So we sort of account for all of those different attributes of the entities. But really, I guess where we start are, what are the entities? What are like the basic objects? And that's going to be, for TWiT's business, that's like episodes, shows, credits, who's the host, guests, airing times. For the business of being on the web, that might be like blog posts, and certainly you do have those. Your sponsors, the offers that those sponsors have, the live stream, obviously the video and audio content, and being able to represent that in data. So those are all kind of like the entities that we started with. And once we had listed those out or identified what those needed to be or what made sense, and in some cases it was like maybe in D6, in Drupal 6, sorry. So in Drupal, we often just we just go with D6 or D7 just to get it out there quicker. So the latest version that's coming out soon is D8. So just that's kind of our lingo, I guess. I don't want to get too, I don't want to lose too much lingo. But
that's okay. Our audience is used to lingo.
Oh, good. Yeah. Anyway, so once we have identified those entities, then we talk about the relationships between them, and that's the space where we might revise what had happened in D6. So if there was maybe an unoptimal, like say a credit was actually embedded in another object and it wasn't a separate thing, we might have broken it apart so that it could be more ready to be served via an API, to have like its own space and its own representation. So those are the kinds of concerns that drove the design of the API. It was really about like, how are these things related in your business? Like, what's the semantic relationship between a person and a show? Well, they're a person who does a thing. They're a host, they're a guest, and connecting those things forms a credit. Credits can be attached to episodes. Credits can be attached to shows. So if you have used the API or you will use the API, you'll see things like that. And it's all about how they're connected. And we represent that in an API. So if that's the content model that we started with, representing that API then means that because we're using a Helios, and Helios is Hypermedia as the engine of application state, which is so we went with a RESTful API, basically a REST API, which means we're using the mechanics of the web to do CRUD-like operations. So, the mechanics of the web, the methods of the web, these are like HTTP gets and puts and patches and deletes. And we're using those HTTP methods, which are part of the spec, to operate on the data. So they're doing the CRUD-like operations that you might do just through regular Drupal. And so for the TWiT API, all of the public part of it is kind of read only. So it's all operating on the Git part of that. But the other part of having a RESTful API or having a REST API is, one, it's about the relationships and states, which I just talked about, using those methods to transition an entity that you might browse or use, right? And then to transition into a new state through those methods. The other part of that is the links or the relationships. And that's something that, when you tie a person to a credit and a credit to a show or a credit to an episode, you can represent that in sort of the embed space in the version, the format of the API that we chose, which is HAL plus JSON, which is a special Helios-enabled version of a JSON API. So that was sort of a long answer. I hope that was okay.
I like it. Nice and detail and tech-oriented. Now, when we come back, David, you were going to show us just a little something that you wanted to cook up for our audience in using the TWiT API. Are you ready to show them some magic?
I can show them some code. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
But first, let's go ahead and thank the second sponsor of this episode of Coding 101. And it's an old friend, lynda.com. Lynda.com is a one-stop shop, a repository for knowledge on the internet. And it doesn't have to be knowledge that you don't already have. It could be reference for something that maybe you learned a long while back and now you need a little bit of a refresher course. Lynda.com is where we go here at the TWiT Brick House to find everything from how do we use Adobe Premiere Pro as we transitioned over from Final Cut Pro to how do we do photography on drones. It really is where you want to go if you want passionate people telling you about the information that you need to know. Now, Lynda.com recently added new essential training for Eclipse, which is an industry standard integrated developer environment and a critical tool for developers who want to build projects in multiple languages, including Java, PHP, C, C++, Perl, and Python. Of course, there's also the latest updates to Code Clinic. Code Clinic is a multi-course series where Lynda.com experts look at common code challenges and offer their solutions using C, C#, C++, Java, JavaScript, PHP, Python, R, Ruby, and Swift. This is an excellent resource for learning a new language and something that we really encourage on Coding 101. We've always told people that it's not about the language, it's about the tool, it's about the problem, it's about finding what works best for any given situation. That's what Lynda.com is trying to give you. Now, with a Lynda.com membership, you can watch and learn from top experts who are passionate about teaching. You can stream thousands of video courses on demand and learn at your own pace. You can learn by creating playlists that you can share with your friends so they can understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to add to your skill set. You can browse each course transcript to follow along, or, and I like this part, search for a specific answer and then skip to that point in the video. This is what makes Lynda.com invaluable as a reference. You could download the tutorials and watch them on the go, including access on your iOS or your Android device. And of course, Lynda.com happens all with one flat monthly rate. Your Lynda.com membership gives you unlimited access to training on hundreds of topics, all for that flat rate. Now, whether you're looking to become an expert, you're passionate about a hobby, or you just want to learn something new, I want you to visit lynda.com/C101. That's lynda.com/C101 and sign up for your free 10-day trial. And we thank lynda.com for their support of Coding 101. David, what is it that you want to show our audience?
Yeah, I kind of wanted just to kind of go behind the scenes a little bit. I thought maybe people might get a kick out of kind of seeing basically going from the editorial interface, like the content type part of that, taking a look at the code that actually produces the API, taking a look at the API output, and kind of being able to relate each of the elements to one another. So I thought, if that's okay,
let's do it.
Okay, so we'll start out. Let me know when you can see my screen. All right, hey, there we are. Okay, I'm doing this locally, and I have a super outdated code set from June, I think. So you just have to I was just going to apologize for not having working off the live side. I didn't want to expose any keys. I know that's a thing that you guys have talked about, and that's kind of fun. But yeah, I just want to avoid the entire issue, and so I'm developing. This is how we developed. I guess it's kind of a window into what happened. We developed locally and had data sets that we pulled down from the Drupal 6 site. We performed a migration from that information into D7, and we got information just like this. And so what we're looking at right now is the Coding 101. I know I just I met you guys today, but I feel like I know you through your JSON because I've been looking at it for a very long time.
Wow, that's a new line. David, could you do me a favor? Is there any way you could blow that up a little bit, increase the size of your font? We're zooming on our side, but it would make it easier if there we go. Okay, good.
Okay, so so this is the JSON representation of Coding 101, the show, right? You can see these are all the attributes that I was kind of talking about. That and in Drupal, these are different elements of the content type. So what I want to do is kind of just I'm going to give us all scroll sickness here for a moment. And just kind of take a look at, how deep this is. And so what's going on here is we're describing all of the elements, all the sort of semantic elements that are a piece of the show. We try to keep it pretty restfully pure, which is to say we don't have there are very minimal fields that have to do with this being presented on a website, because we're kind of going with an agnostic data model that, it doesn't matter about the delivery device, wanted to keep it fairly pure. And that means that clients like the website or clients like the apps that you might write, just get pure data, can make decisions about it without having things named like left image and right image or iPhone image or something like that. So, all right. I'm just going to do a real fast scroll here, so close your eyes if you don't want to get ill. So obviously the show is a pretty large object, but as Lou mentioned, I think last episode or something, like it's not that big of a piece of data. You're not looking at a huge payload, so that's kind of nice. There's a way to limit that, and it's in the docs. And Patrick, I don't know if you've gone over sort of like limiting on fields in any of these. And under your airtime, but you can basically limit the size of any payload by just like kind of have a comma delimited list of fields that you can attach as one of your query params on your API call. So you can make it as small, you can make it even smaller than it is if you just want specific pieces of information. Just limit them by the the field names. So I just wanted to show that kind of as a trick. But yeah, so this show, which is actually here, down at the bottom, this is what I was sort of talking about. It has, this is your relationship space for shows. This is the Helios space where you can kind of go off into the different relationships that each kind of entity has. And they have different types of relationships, depending on the entity that it is. For shows, we have a link over to the episodes endpoint, and I'll go ahead and navigate there. As a development tool, I used Postman personally. Obviously, Matt and Kevin Lamping used the Node interface that they were building for the website, and I'm just demonstrating in Chrome here, where I've got like basically a JSON formatter that makes it look nice. And I only have 74 episodes here, so you can tell that it's kind of out of date. I've got more than that, but. And so, yes, you can navigate between things based on those relationships at the bottom of the how JSON format. So that is that. But then, okay, so I want to take this from this JSON representation of Coding 101, and actually want to take a look at, what that looks like over here. I'm just going to bring over my Drupal screen. So this is my local implementation, and here we're actually looking at the Drupal interface for Coding 101. So you can see, if we kind of do a split screen here, how these things, they don't have a one-to-one relationship, because this is maybe more of an editorial experience we wanted to provide that would work for people who, the people who are entering this information for you all, versus the people who are consuming it, the machines that are consuming it. So
right. I was actually just about to ask you that. So I see that screen in Elroy all the time. So whenever our producers push up content, they have to fill in show title and guest, et cetera, et cetera. How much of that translates into the JSON blob that I would get when I hit the API, and how much is just auto-generated by the back end?
On the auto-generated by the backend for the JSON, or auto-generated on the backend for the editorial experience?
Well, both. So what I end up getting in the JSON blob when I hit the API, where does that all come from? Because I know they don't put that all in when they upload the shows.
Yeah, so that's actually the other part of that Helios or hypermedia experience with a RESTful API, or a Helios-enabled RESTful API, is that you get these rich embeds. So for an episode, like basically the show, in terms of like how content gets entered for you all. Like shows don't maybe get added. What is it, Patrick? Like maybe you add 2 or 3 a year or something like that, but it's not like we're doing it every day.
Yeah, it's not very common.
Yeah, so this stuff like generally stays pretty static, and you can see how it relates. But if we actually went to, if I go back over here and we go to an episode, so I'll just go back down to an episode to your episodes here, and I'm going to, and this is kind of in a JSON list pattern, which means that you'll have lists at like /episodes is a listing of all the episodes, and here I've filtered it for the show 1680, which is the ID of Coding 101. So you kind of navigate items based on IDs, right? So, and that's a good RESTful practice. So I filtered that down, but if we can actually go to an individual item, like this one, 60116. So I'm going to go to that. I could find the self link in there, but I won't. So I'm going, so at basically /episodes is all episodes, /episodes/ID is a specific episode. And so this is a specific episode. This is episode 60116. Over on the Drupal side, I'm going to bring that back. And I'm just going to go over here and put in 60116.
Oh.
Okay, so yeah, so here we go. It's 1-to-1. Basically, here's all the information for this episode, and it's basically translated over here. Now, what they're not entering, what your guys are not entering on a day-to-day basis is, a lot of this media information, and Patrick's really intimately familiar with this process. But it is a private process between basically the Drupal elements and sort of the things that are producing the video content for you all. And so like those two systems talk to each other, and all this information is being produced and connected to a particular episode, and that's happening in a semi-automatic fashion. So they're not doing that. But it is here. It is being connected. They're also not, like they might connect you, or it might actually pre-pop. I can't remember at the moment. So we have sort of credits, and once they enter in a name, everything that's, about your data, that you are the host, your bio and everything, that isn't sort of being entered in. It was entered in once, and then they kind of like point to it, and that reference that's created gives you this kind of rich embedded behavior, which is sort of that hypermedia thing. Hypermedia for websites meant you could add links that actually worked, that went to another web page, that got you off the island of a single website and out into the World Wide Web. It also gave you embedded images and may give you rich media. For hypermedia within APIs is sort of the ability to embed different entities within each other, the ability to also do linking and have those kinds of relationships that we just explored by going from show to episode. So there is, so some of hopefully there's some editorial kind of ease. Everything could be, everything could be better, I guess, in the world of things that are possible. This is actually pretty stock Drupal interface here. This is kind of D7. There's a few things.
I was about to say that. I mean, you did a really good job of building this backend on beneath Drupal. So our guys don't have the interface changing so much that they freaked out, which is always bad around here when you have editors running around going, I don't know what to do.
Well, they do that for other reasons.
Yeah.
It's like a big concern, especially with the pressure of sort of abstraction. It's not a normal behavior for kind of like blog sites or content entry even to be like, if we go to what this episode looks like, I just want to show you this, like, because no one will ever see, we actually blocked this off, but this is what the episode looks like. I mean, this is in your old website, like looking at this path, right, or the equivalent path would have shown you like the visual display that anybody going to the site, the public site would have seen, and it would have looked exactly like that. What editors are getting here are just data values, so it's really kind of abstracted. Now, when that represents or is ingested by Node and then rendered in Dust.js, it looks great. It looks like the TWiT site, but that's not their experience when they're necessarily entering this stuff. And there's a period of time that it is possible to preview things, but it's not probably the normal. And so it's kind of a new space for editorial experience to go, which I think is maybe going to be, I think you all like, man, let's new technology, let's go for it. Headless, let's go for it. And I think Leo was excited. I think you all were. I was like, let's do something new. Let's do something exciting. Let's do something that really pushes the envelope. And so really forward-leaning technology companies are like all on board. But then on the editorial side, it's like, hey, I used to be able to preview the homepage. I used to be able to preview all this stuff. Like, what are you telling me I can't? Like, that's not acceptable. So finding ways to get that preview capability and make that easier is going to be, part of how decoupled sites and microservices-based architectures really evolve and become good. It's not impossible. It's just like, it's just one of many priorities, and depending on what's most important to you, you're going to, it gets sorted out in the wash. So,
and actually,
kind of
no, Patrick, that's the idea of the TWiT API. Since it is decoupled, at any given time, we could decide to change the front end, give TWiT a brand new look, and none of this has to change.
Yeah, the back end stays the same. So the editors get used to this one process, and the new site, same process.
Right, right. And that's not what we had, because anyone in our audience who has run Drupal or WordPress knows that over the years, you just start saying, oh, I'll just change this. This makes it look better. And suddenly, you're intimately coupled. There's no way to rip the front end off the back end without breaking everything. And that's where we were. And actually, David, we've got a good question from a member of the audience, Rock Twist, who wants to know, did you have issues normalizing from 6 to 7 when you're transitioning our data over?
In terms of migration, yeah, there were, D6 has nodes, so nodes are like sort of the entity, like the basic piece of content, the basic Lego block of Drupal 6, right? And we have nodes in Drupal 7, but they're entity based. The transition between node to node is pretty good, but some of the ways that data was represented in D6 were pretty imaginative. And
wow, that's polite.
Patrick, tell us what really happened when we went from 6 to 7.
6 to 7, it was great. It's just that what we had in 6, it had been the result of years and years of just building onto it, and yeah, it was kind of a mess.
And now we have people in the chat room who are saying, well, why wouldn't it be normalized? It wasn't normalized because we decided just over the years to just add things on, because we could code something really small and it would work, but then it would translate to 7. 7 had no idea what we were doing with it.
It's kind of, Drupal has a really big contribution code space, which is like, because it's an open source project, people are adding to it. They've got their own opinions. They have their own levels of expertise with the code. They have their own levels of expertise with Drupal itself and how it works, and familiarity with Drupal's own API, code API. And so, quality is not a guarantee. But the functionality, when things, I guess the thing with that is like, if it delivers functionally, it works for you, cool. It's just when it comes time to, I guess, pay the piper in terms of like migrating that data over, it might be a challenge. So, there are a lot of resources out there that kind of like, hey, better modules, kind of like sketchy modules, that kind of like rank those things. So you're not alone in the world of like, well, what if I make a bad choice? There's a lot of information, that will support you about making good choices. So you're not sort of like alone out there.
I've seen sites actually abandon old data sets just because they just figured it's too much trouble. I mean, we customized this so much. We added so many fields that are non-standard that it would be a nightmare to strip them out. If you don't have that much data, you probably would feel the same. I mean, if you've only been building something for a year and you want to switch to something new, are you going to sit there and actually sit down and write all the code you need to make sure it transfers over properly, and then go through every single content item to make sure it transferred over properly? Or will you just say, I'm going to start with something standard and I'm never going to move off the standard? Lou, I want to throw this to you, because you do this in a large environment, a corporate environment, with products that make millions and millions of dollars. I mean, you have, this is why development takes so long at the enterprise level, right? Because you have a very specific process you have to follow before you make even the smallest change.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of products out there that are, still legacy. Their backends are built in a specific way, just as Dave was describing. And, when you try to transition them, you have to build special tooling sometimes, and you have to, find a migration process, and you have to keep the data's integrity there too sometimes, and especially with some of the software that we build, you don't want to lose all your legacy show information, or you don't want to lose, the context of that show information. With some of these business applications, you don't want to lose data around customers and stuff, or some of that contextual data around customers. Otherwise, customers will be ticked off. And then, you're also moving to different platforms, like some people are moving to Node off of different other platforms, that kind of thing. And sometimes transitioning those two things is tough. So yeah, it's a constant struggle, which is why software takes a long time. And with technology changing so quickly, that's a hard thing to do.
David, I want to throw one last question to you before we have to cut out for this episode. We will have you back, by the way, so audience, don't worry. We're going to get you all the skivvy behind the TWiT API. TWiT's not your only client, obviously. You've seen a lot of work. You've worked on many contracts, many projects. How much of this process of upgrading websites is really just doing this aforementioned data sanitization?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, is there kind of an upgrade site that we didn't make improvements to the data model?
That's probably a better question. Have you ever gone to a customer and said, oh, wow, we could just upgrade this all, no problem, back end, front end, we're done?
I guess I would answer that and I don't mean to dodge a bullet here, but I'd say if it depends on what needs to happen, right? Yeah. If it's not a priority, all of the improvements to the data model that we could possibly do, and certainly there would be some for every client, maybe, 90% of the clients. If that's not what needs to happen, we actually have done work. I've not been a part of it because I'm not on the front end, but we've done work where it's didn't touch the data model at all. We delivered a new responsive experience just entirely on the theming front end of a Drupal site. We've even stayed, we would like to move to 7. We just don't, have the money right now. So can we just make a mobile experience in 6? Yeah, we can do that. So yeah, I mean, those things happen. I just don't see them because to me, that's more of a front end. If I'm involved, right, it's because there's data modeling to do, or there's back end work to do, or the client wants to do something new. And in those cases, sometimes, actually TWiT's a great example. So in some cases on the D6 side, especially around your credits and your people entities, and on the D6 side, a lot of those were softly modeled. So we had to do quite a bit of massaging to get it into a format that was going to work for the API, that created real relationships versus blurbish. So I'm just, I'm in a WYSIWYG field and I'm typing I am doing this, and in some way that has meaning to me as a viewer. But that really breaks down when you can't represent those relationships in data, because you saw the power of kind of being able to go from show to episodes from a machine perspective. That's really great, and having real links is there. If you have a field that is text that has a link in it, it doesn't know it's a link, then there's a lot more work that needs to be done to turn that into a real data relationship versus a contextual relationship.
All right. David Diers from 4 Kitchens. He, I'm going to say it because he is the single musician. He was the orchestrator, the conductor, the main force, driving force behind the TWiT API and the TWiT TV website. It may not be completely true, but it feels like it from here. I want to thank you so very much for being part of this episode of Coding 101. We're going to be bringing you back in the next episode because there's plenty more story to tell. But could you please let our audience know where they can find you? There's actually been people in the chat room who want to know where they can find your music and where they can find 4 Kitchens.
Okay, yes, 4 Kitchens. We're a shop here in Austin, Texas. You can find us at 4kitchens.com. That's one word.com. You can also find our blogging series. Actually, I have a blogging series called Rest Easy, which talks about the specific API technology that we use to deliver TWiT's API. And there's a tutorial series. I'm on my 4th version of that, and it's a weekly series, so we'll be moving for that. If you wanted to learn how to implement a Drupal API like TWiT has, just tune into that series. You can find me on Twitter at BeautyHammer. I release what I think is comedy there. And if you wanted to listen to my music, and I hope you will, that's at daviddiers.com, David, D-I-E-R-S.com.
David Diers, we thank you for being part of this episode. We'll have you back, and we salute you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Also, I want to thank my co-hosts who make Coding 101 really what it is. Let's start with you, Patrick. What do you want to plug today? Is it going to be your wife or is it going to be you?
I'm going to be at DragonCon on Labor Day weekend. So if anybody else is there, come on up, say hi. And I'll be wandering around, sometimes in costume, sometimes just having fun.
And you can't tell us what the costumes. I mean, that's part of the fun, right?
I'm working on my wife's costume, so I haven't even started.
Can you tell us what your wife's costume is going to be?
It's from Star Wars. I'll just say that.
Ooh. Okay.
So I have to go cut more armor tonight.
That's such a strange thing to hear. Aluma Reska, senior lead, a software developer from Microsoft in their CRM department. Can you please tell folks where they can find you, your work, and of course, your position at Microsoft?
You bet. Yeah, you can always find me on Twitter at LouMM. And of course, all the work that I do for CRM and Microsoft can be found at crm.dynamics.com.
And folks, don't forget that if you are getting excited by the TWiT API, Lou has made his code available. If you go to the show notes for the last episode, there's a link where you can download a zip file that contains his entire program. If you want to start playing with the TWiT API, all you have to do is download his code and then get a key. And Patrick, how do they get the key?
Go to the TWiT.tv website and go to About, and under that you will see developer information, and the documentation link is there on Apiary, and you can find a link to 3Scale where you can sign up for an API key. They're free.
Do it now. Get coding. Don't forget, we do this show every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. Usually it's live. This particular one is not. But go ahead and jump into the TWiT stream at live.twit.tv and watch us live so you can see the pre-show, the post-show, and everything in between. If you're going to watch us live, jump into the chat room at irc.twit.tv so you can be part of our audience and actually give us feedback during the show. That's a great place to ask questions if you've got that burning question for one of our guests. Also, don't forget that we've got, well, our guests here are all part of the TWiT TV army. I could say that, right?
Sure.
And you can find all of our shows at twit.tv. Finally, thanks to everyone who makes this show possible. So to Lisa, to Leo, and of course, to our technical director for this episode, Mr. Hal Grumple. Hal, could you please say hello? Oh, you know, you told me you weren't going to drink till later. I don't know what this is all about. I guess it's been one of those days. Folks, until next time, I'm Father Robert Balazer. This has been Coding 101. And Lou, what did we say at the end of the episodes?
End of line.